Some of the most successful people I know are people who never stop asking questions. And all of us start our careers probably asking a lot of questions to learn. But I think the best ones never stop, even when you're at the top, right? And so I observed that, and I wanted to keep that. We all joke about the older we get, the more we realize we don't know. But, it's true. And I think we have to be humble enough to know that there's a lot we don't know. We can always learn more.
On this episode, I'm speaking with Jay Parsons, a rental housing economist, investor, speaker, and advisor. Most recently, he joined the Madera Residential team as the head of investment strategy and research. Previously, Jay was the chief economist at RealPage, a leading rental housing software and analytics provider. He's been cited in numerous publications, including The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, The Financial Times, The Economist, The New York Times, NBC News, Politico, and he's also appeared on CNBC and BloombergTV. Over the last decade plus, Jay has advised numerous rental housing stakeholders, including institutional investors, REITs, small investment groups, lenders, regulators, government agencies, and even nonprofits. In 2023, he was named as an influencer in multifamily real estate by GlobeSt, a leading industry trade publication. This was a really fun conversation with Jay, getting to know the man behind the LinkedIn following and what he's all about. So please join me in this conversation. Let's dive in. All right, Jay, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me.
I feel like I say this at the top of every interview, but I love digging into the history of the guests because I think it brings a little bit more of the kind of backstory and context to the person we're speaking to. And from my conversations with you so far, I know that we both grew up in the South, and there's something to that. So I want to start there. And for you, I want to hear where that was and what that upbringing was like for you back then.
Sure. So I grew up mostly in Charlotte, North Carolina. I moved around a little bit, and so didn't really know things much different, But I'll tell you the kind of quick funny story is I went to school in Maryland, and only 5%. I didn't realize at the time, but only 5% of the student population at the University of Maryland came from south of Maryland, and I found it very odd when in the school cafeteria, nobody said thank you to the cafeteria workers, which to me was, even if you didn't mean thank you, you always said it out of kind of reflex. And so, it was a little bit different, but a lot of great people up there. It was nothing negative in the long run, but but it was a good place to grow up.
Tell me a little bit about your upbringing in terms of, and I'm thinking about this, I'm trying to think back to this quote you told me that you were a kid that was excellent at nothing, but pretty good at quite a few things. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, like a lot of kids, growing up, I mean, I was into all sorts of stuff, whether it was, sports, played, baseball, basketball, tennis, I'm sure some other things over the years, soccer, flag football. I mean, all sorts of stuff. And, I was, within different activities as well. And like I told you, I was one of those kids who was pretty good at a lot of things, really excelled at nothing, especially athletically. I was a really good rec sports player, not good enough to play varsity anything in a major high school. But that was probably my lack of ability to make an impact in any one area on the athletic field.
Tell me a little bit about the school newspaper, because I know that was, I guess looking back, sort of the seeds being planted of some of the stuff you've worked your way through in your career journey so far. Did you go in thinking, you know what, I'm going to be the school newspaper guy, I'm going to work my way up to, let's say, editor and so forth? Or what was your mindset around getting involved with the newspaper?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into that, when you're in school, that you try doing different things. And I was in middle school. We started off in this rotational program where you did, I think it was, you spent, like 6 weeks in music, 6 weeks in art. And then they had, at the time, journalism was the other thing. And I was a terrible artist. And no matter how hard I worked on things, it never seemed to go well for me in terms of the grades. Music was music. It was okay. And then journalism just kind of came easily. And so got involved with our school newspaper, and that was a lot of fun. It's kind of like any other club where you just get involved and, get more active and stuff. You build great relationships with other students who had similar interests. And And I went to the high school I went to. We had, I think, 6 or 7 students in that class ended up becoming professional journalists at some point, and so it was kind of a little bit of a rock star group. And so it all kind of fed into each other. Kids with similar interests, had a good student advisor, and I fell in love with reading Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein, all their Watergate books, and watching all the President's Men. Just kind of fell in love with kind of romanticizing what investigative journalism could be. And so, looking back on that, I guess we take into this more, kind of planted the seeds for, really just a love for like just digging into something, and not so much just writing articles and that kind of thing. It's more about just the process of studying something in depth, and then when you write about it, it's more of a byproduct of the research that you do, and that's the stuff I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's almost like you do all the research, you do the digging, you uncover everything, and then you're baking it all together as you actually write the.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, I never liked being described, even my brief career in journalism. I didn't like being described as a writer, because like writing isn't the fun part, right? It's writing comes as a result of all the other stuff that you do for people like me. Now, if other people who really like to write, more creative writing, not my skill set, but again, writing is just the process of putting together all the fun stuff.
Let's talk about Maryland. My dad is a fellow TERP alumni, and been there a couple times. It's a really, really beautiful campus, and a uniquely positioned campus too, as it relates to the city. Tell me about your journey to the journalism program there, and was that something that you said, you know what, that's it for me, checking the 2 boxes, Maryland and journalism program? You kind of like went in head first and knew what you wanted, or did you fall into that?
No, I mean, I probably toured a dozen different colleges, and Maryland was, ultimately, I hadn't been there previous to visiting it, and just fell in love with the campus. It's this beautiful suburban campus. For those who not been watching this and never been there, you have this kind of idyllic suburban campus with a beautiful walkability, and but you're also right in the middle of the Washington D.C. Beltway. It really is part of the DC area. And so getting into Washington, DC was really easy. And so you're kind of this, again, kind of suburban oasis in the midst of a major metropolitan area. And so especially being interested in, journalism at the time, and, access to everywhere where Watergate happened, that was really appealing. And also, while I certainly wasn't being recruited for sports, I sure love sports, and being part of, I grew up in Charlotte, so I was a big fan of the ACC, grew up a Tar Heel fan. But then, and so it was fun being part of the ACC at the time. Of course, Maryland's now Big Ten, which is kind of bizarre still for an ACC guy growing up. But it was fun being able to watch the same teams I was used to seeing playing basketball and football and other sports.
I was going to say we might need to have like a sidebar conversation of Duke and UNC, because I grew up in Southern Virginia, but always loved the Blue Devils, and so it was the early 90s kind of Blue Devil squad for me, and kind of wild now thinking back and see Grant Hill doing NBA finals games and playoff games. But I've been to the Tar Heel a couple Tar Heel games at the Chapel Hill, and beautiful campus. And the older I got, the more I appreciated the kind of friendly rivalry between the two without necessarily picking sides. So it was kind of fun to hear that you grew up at Tar Heel. Really cool.
Yeah, no, it was funny because growing up, like Duke and Carolina had a big rival. Well, they always had a big rival, but they were the top 2 teams. When I was there in basketball, it was really Duke and Maryland, and they went, one year Duke won the national championship, the next year Maryland won, and so there was a pretty fierce rivalry while I was there, and that was a lot of fun.
Well, let's talk about the DC area. Did you stick around after graduating, or did you kind of spread your wings, so to speak, and end up somewhere else?
Yeah, no, I loved going to school there, but knew it wasn't for me longer term, and so I wanted to go someplace a little different, and so ended up moving to Dallas, got a job there, and my best friend growing up was living in Dallas, and so kind of gave me some connection to it, but still kind of somewhere new, and being early 20s, it was a time of life to kind of do something different, and the funny part about it was that once I got there, that my best friend, my buddy Joe, he ended up getting engaged almost right away, and I barely saw the guy. We still got together some, and still stay, and still a very good friend of mine. But he was a big reason I moved to Dallas, and then as time went on, got plugged in, met a beautiful Texas girl, and as the saying goes, you don't take a Texas girl out of Texas. And so we're still
Mm,
here today, and we have my wife and I have five young kids, and we live close to my in-laws, which has been amazing since they
mm,
provide free babysitting and whatnot. So I love it here
yep.
now. It's home now.
Man, I'm in the same boat. My wife and I have a 3 year old, and just down the road from the in laws, and it's a game changer. We moved to a different part of Colorado about a year and a half ago, and to be closer to the in laws, and I echo that feeling greatly. It's a huge perk for sure
Oh
as
yeah.
the kids grow up. Well, I'm always curious to how you found your way to multifamily. It's never a straight path, it seems like. And I'm wondering if quote unquote multifamily was on the radar for you in Dallas. Did you get there and it kind of fell in your lap? Did you dive right into it, or kind of what was that early scratching the surface of multifamily for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I've yet to meet anybody in multifamily who grew up thinking, "Man, I'd love to be in the multifamily industry one day," unless it was kind of the family business or something. I think pretty much everybody stumbles into the multifamily business, and I was really no exception to that. As I've mentioned, I first moved to Dallas really for a job. Worked at the Dallas Morning News a few years. At the time, it was one of the largest newspapers in the country, maybe still is. I'm not sure, but it was really before a lot of the local media start to have a lot of challenges. And so, um, it was, a lot of good people there, working really hard, very talented folks, but it was a tough time. This was, mid 2000s. It was a tough time to be in media. And also too, it's, the luster really wore off really quickly. And, I like, as I mentioned, I kind of idealized and romanticized the industry, thinking I could be, Woodward and Bernstein doing really great in-depth stuff and taking down
Mm,
the president of the United States. And instead, I'm spending my Monday nights at a suburban city council meeting covering some obscure topic that even the locals don't care about because they're not at the meeting and they're probably not going to read my article no matter how much I work on it. So, um, and that wasn't a knock on the people I worked with. It was the situation of the environment of the time. And so, in hindsight, I, started to, kind of look for something different, think about going back to school, looking at finance and economics. And then, in hindsight, one of the greatest blessings for me was the great financial crisis, 2008 hits. I got laid off along with many others at the newspaper, and or my position did. And so kind of gave me the kick in the pants to go kind of figure out what that next thing was.
mm,
And it was a tough time. It was obviously right in the middle of a recession, and I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but that's kind of what led to that next stage.
yeah, and I love this part of your story because it punctuates the idea that we never really know where things are going to lead. And I saw a video the other day. It was kind of like a trick basketball shot meme where someone was trying to make a shot kind of right in front of them. There's a little basketball hoop on a fence, but as they threw the ball and they tried to make the shot, the fence gate opened and there was another basketball hoop, like 20 feet behind in the yard, and they made the basket back there. But I thought it was a nice symbol for, you might be thinking you're headed in one direction or gonna, make one shot, but you're actually, headed for a totally different shot. So case in point, when the RealPage opportunity came up, how did you view that opportunity at the time? What did that look like about 15-ish years ago?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I look at it as a big blessing where, I had one plan in my head, God had a bigger plan I just didn't see at the time. And so, and looking back, I do see it. I mean, it's, one thing that I'll say kind of leading into the RealPage is that I realized from my time in 3 years in journalism, that I wanted to go back to what really drove me into journalism in the first place, which is to be an expert in something, really study things in depth. And at least my job that I had, I was more the person calling experts and kind of a generalist who knew a little about a lot of stuff. And so I wanted to be, that was kind of one of the drivers. And I didn't know if I could do that right away. It was part of the reason for thinking about, kind of longer term a career. And so Just to set the table a little bit, this is, again, it was 2008. It was, we got laid off October 2008. I was already in the middle of ring shopping and proposing to my now wife. And, and so one of the most humbling moments of my life was, talking to my father-in-law, and asking for permission to marry his daughter when I was unemployed. And
Oh
thankfully,
man.
he's a great guy. Still is a great guy, and told me, "Hey, look, I trust you. You're going to do fine." And he probably had more faith in me than I had faith in myself. But yeah, I had been proposed to my now wife without a job, which was also not how I wrote it up. And thankfully, but also kind of more adding humbling to me was that she was in a great job and doing very, very well. So so I was applying for jobs very aggressively, and just anything I could find, not trying to be picky. And I saw this opportunity at RealPage, which I'd never heard of. But the office was 5 minutes from where I lived, and it was right across the street from where the church where my wife and I met. And so it was like, all right, well, I should look at this. And it was kind of a crummy job, honestly. But it was just, or I should say, I mean, it was just a very basic entry level job. It was a research analyst, writing research reports on the apartment market. And so I interviewed for it. They gave me various rounds of testing and whatnot, and I did everything I could just to get that job, not because I was really excited about it or saw it as a I mean, it kind of, I should maybe rephrase that. Not because I saw it as a long-term opportunity, but I saw it as a way to pay the bills and to
Right.
contribute my part. So that's how it all started.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Transforming Cities. Brought to you by Authentic, delivering premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Authentic's proven approach accelerates leasing velocity, boosts rental rates, and increases long-term value. You can find out more at AuthenticFF.com. And by Charles Gate, the multifamily investor's secret weapon to help underwrite, go to market, and operate projects that generate market-beating returns. With an adaptive staffing model and on-demand leasing teams, Charles Gate empowers a better resident experience at an efficient cost structure for today's owners. Visit charlesgate.com for more. Yeah, that's so fascinating, because when we think about, at least I think from the outside looking in, the Jay Parsons of LinkedIn, and everyone has looked to you in the last many years for your analysis and your reporting and kind of your personal take on various topics. It's hard to imagine you back in 2008, 2009 thinking, oh my gosh, I just have to get this job and keep this job.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in those first couple of years, what was your mindset like? Obviously there was this pressure to do well and keep the job, but maybe I'm curious, a couple of your first assignments, what did those look like? I mean, analysts,
Yeah.
how did that kind of start to evolve for you?
Well, so back then, RealPage was much smaller, and so RealPage had acquired this group called MPF Research, which was my job, working and tracking the apartment market across the country. And I was in the process too of going back to grad school and studying things that I thought would help me kind of longer term. So, but yeah, I'm trying to really just keep the job. And I shared the story recently on LinkedIn, but my first assignment was I had to write the report on the Chicago apartment market. And, of course, I knew very little about the Chicago apartment market at the time. But I, I busted my tail in this thing. I got in early, I stayed late. I read past reports. I did a bunch of research. Tried to pull things from different places, studied the data. I mean, everything. And I wanted to really crush this thing and impress my boss. So but he was a very particular guy, and I turned it into him, and he pretty much tore it to shreds.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, he looked at me. I'm not one of those people who remembers like all these like little moments in life, but I definitely remember sitting in his office and sort of feeling very, very small and kind of wondering, can I survive here? Can I even make it here? But thankfully, it got better. He helped me get better, and others around me helped me get better. And then a few years, actually, I think it was, I don't know, 2 or 3 years later, he ended up leaving and I got promoted into his role, and that's kind of what kind of set everything else in motion. And then over time, starting right then, I started to get opportunities that I really wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't kind of stumbled into RealPage when it was still small, kind of
Mm.
at the right time. I mean, this was back then. RealPage had about 1,200 employees compared to I think more than 7,000 today, and so so it was again kind of right place, right time in hindsight. So I had to kind of
Yeah.
ride it out, but it turned out to be a good situation.
You told me two different things. You said at that time you felt like you were thrust into a job that you were not ready for, which I think is a common feeling for a lot of people in their career journeys. And then number two, you said that you really started to be able to dig into what you called myths in the
Yeah.
industry. What type of myths in the industry did you feel like you were kind of picking at and pulling threads on?
Yeah, so this is, I guess I jumped over this, but this is what really made me want to stick with it. I mean, again, I'd met a lot of great people. That was a big part of it. But the other part was I fell in love with the stories. I mean, the research side and realizing that this was an industry in rental housing that is often misunderstood by the public, by the media, even by investors, because it's so relatable in a way that we kind of don't bother to think it through a little more deeply. By that, it means like everybody's lived in an apartment or had a family or a friend who lived in an apartment. And it just seems like a very simple thing. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized, wait a minute, like a lot of these things people think aren't necessarily true. And it all started for me with when I started working at RealPage, we got all this data. And it was one of the things I remember seeing was that Pittsburgh had the lowest vacancy rate in the country. And I thought, like, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I mean, Pittsburgh is great, very cool city. But, over the last few decades, it's also seen, stagnant, if not negative population change and job change. And so why would they have the lowest vacancy rate? I remember
Mm,
asking one of my colleagues this and learned, well, it's because they don't build anything. They have not been building for decades. And so what is there tends to be full. And then it all started with that. And then realizing that, this kind of led to a lot of other things where I started to kind of want to pursue things where people would say this and like, wait a minute, like, is that really true? And then,
mm.
I've kind of really built a lot of my career out of disproving some of these myths that, investors or policymakers or media are putting out there.
I think that idea dovetails really nicely into the topic of LinkedIn, which obviously I would be remiss without sort of digging into and getting your take on. And I think you mentioned to me that it was right around when COVID was happening that there was a shift in how you were spending your time and sharing your thoughts publicly. You became more active on LinkedIn. Your audience started to build up at that time, and this is obviously 4-ish years ago now, and you have quite the audience today. So what was your approach? What was your initial just, hey, Jay, the nice guy, posting a few things about, data and analysis? What was your mindset back then?
Well, yeah, yeah. So going back, one thing I should have mentioned earlier too is that within RealPage, I had a unique position that was really ideal for anybody starting in, a research role in commercial real estate or multifamily, and that was, within RealPage being a vendor allowed me kind of a front row seat with investors, operators, third party managers, the REITs, brokers, lenders, policymakers, and even working directly with renters
Mm,
and other groups as well. And so I kind of got to learn the industry from all angles. And then, I spent, at this point, a decade, really, in meeting with these stakeholders in different settings, at whether it's in their offices or at conferences and whatnot. And so, and then of course having access to all this data. And then so when COVID hit, obviously we're not getting together in person anymore, and that's really been modeled by forum. I had a lot of, you know, good relationships with folks we'd meet with in person, but it was obviously in a much smaller scale. And so when COVID hit, for some reason, I decided, well, it's probably a good time to start writing articles on LinkedIn and whatnot, and also we do doing more webinars and as a way just to kind of communicate with folks. And I was hesitant to do so because it kind of feels weird. You're putting yourself out there and you don't know
sure.
what to say. But it just took off. And it's opened up a lot of doors for me. It's opened up a lot of new relationships from folks I've met. I mean, this sounds so weird to say because, I'm, at this point, I'm a geriatric millennial. So it's not like, I'm kind of an old man now. So it's kind of weird to say this, but it's like, you have, friendships that start online and then,
Absolutely.
kind of go into the real world. So it's been really rewarding.
That must be a fun conversation with your 5 kids, kind of, oh, back when I was, in 2020 when COVID happened, your dad was online and doing videos. It's going to be a pretty fun story to tell your kids one.
Yeah, well, they keep me humble. They like to know how many followers I have, then they'll let me know how many Mr. Beast has.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah.
of course, I'm like 0.0001% of Mr. Beast, so they're not impressed at
Yeah.
all. So.
That's not a fair comparison, but you've built
Tell
quite the
them that.
following, which I think is yeah. Well, I would like to transition to the announcement of your departure from RealPage because I think I've probably been passively following you and commenting here and there, for the last 3 or 4 years on your stuff. Honestly, it's probably right around COVID and when we started doing it more actively. But in so many words, you told me you wanted to shift from the guy on the sidelines to a guy in the game. And I know that
Yeah.
you kind of posted about this on LinkedIn, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that meaning for you and what this next opportunity means for you at this stage in your career.
Yeah, so I had a really great job at RealPage, and I wasn't actively looking to leave RealPage. It's a really unique kind of seat within the industry to have the role that I did, and especially somebody who's not a technologist at all, but really, just again, kind of having these front row seat to these different stakeholders in the industry. Um, and so, but what happened is, I knew long term that, when I mentioned to be on the sidelines, like I was in a role essentially like a coach, like advising other people what to do, but I wasn't actually on the playing field. And so I knew at some point it's like that was missing for me. It's like I knew I wanted to do that. So for me, especially not being a technologist, like, you know, I didn't have an upward path at RealPage because I had no qualifications or desire even to kind of go up any higher than I could or was at RealPage, right? It just wasn't for me. I'm not a technology guy, and so then kind of concurrent with all that, I'd been working with some former colleagues and friends who had started a multifamily investment group called Waymaker here in Dallas, and Waymaker had done some deals with Madera Residential, and they had made a decision to kind of join forces and to come together. So at that point, they came to me and said, "Hey, we'd like you to be part of this." And so we started to walk through that and kind of see what that would look like, and it ended up, making a lot of sense and something that got really excited about. Madera, they've built up a tremendous reputation in Texas, 11,000 units. Very focused on multifamily, very successful, very well respected across Texas and all asset classes. But they had an aggressive growth strategy to be able to go into the Southeast and other markets, and they wanted me to be part of it, and helping them, kind of build that strategy, and also building out an attainable housing platform, which is something I'm really, really passionate about. So yeah, it all kind of came together, and it just felt like there was I kind of ran out of reasons to say no. It was kind of a perfect situation for me.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I guess one last question as it relates to LinkedIn. Now that you've made that transition, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but does the LinkedIn posting strategy change now that you're with Madera versus kind of the RealPage guy that everyone looks to for or at RealPage at your former post?
Yeah, no, but it's funny. People have asked me that a lot, and it really doesn't, because like I've always tried to be a guy who's posting. My goal has always been thought leadership. Like real content and not promotional content. And so even in RealPage, like I wasn't. I would be posting from data that we'd had from RealPage, and so my goals do the same, and my partners feel the same way. It's like if I'm not going to be hawking deals and whatnot. But I'm writing about things that are interesting to me, the things that I'm studying that are, I think, hopefully interesting to others as well. And if anything, hope to have access, starting to get access to even more data sets. So I'm still a client of RealPage. Still have some good friends who are running the data business at RealPage who just do a phenomenal job. And so certainly have a lot of respect for that team and the data behind it. But, also now as a client, have access to other things as well. And so I'm hoping to,
Mm.
if anything, kind of up my game a little bit on
Okay.
LinkedIn and Twitter and elsewhere.
Okay, you heard it here first. Then I'm curious, as someone who is as successful as you are so far, with the following that you have, with the thought leadership positions that you hold. I am curious just about the day in the life of Jay, the guy, the dad, the normal human being. Walk me through what that looks like for you, because I think sometimes we get into this mindset of, oh, Jay Parsons, he just dropped this big LinkedIn bomb this morning with 100 comments already, but you're just you're a normal nice guy as well, and you're a family man. So I got to ask, walk me through the day. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, it's not particularly exciting, so I'm flattered that people you've even asked. But every day is different. That's one thing I love about what I do is, I'm not the type of person who wants to do the exact same thing every single day, but I do have a little bit of routine, and I think at least for me, everyone's different. But I like to have a little bit of routine, but also a lot of flexibility to be able to kind of tackle what's most relevant that day, both personally and professionally. But for me, I have daddy carpool duty on days I'm in town, so. About 7:30 in the morning, I'm taking the three of my kids to elementary school, and then so after I get back, before I even do anything else, before I even comb my hair and put on my Zoom shirt and all that kind of stuff, like I'll sit at the computer and read. You got my news feeds from checking up on different things, looking at people I like to follow, emails, all that type of stuff. And that first, really a couple hours of the morning, I really try to protect, just to carve out to spend some time, kind of thinking and reading and writing on ideas that I may have been chewing on for a few days, or something that just caught my eye from a headline that morning, and Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or a trade publication or whatever. And so, yeah, a lot of I would say the 90% of the posts that I write on LinkedIn, really come together that morning, just from stuff I've been thinking about, that just saw or been thinking about for a couple of days, and finally kind of had hopefully a semi-coherent thought to put together. So that's where most of that comes from. And then a lot of the charts and slides that I share, the charts that I share on LinkedIn, some of that will come from slide decks that I do for presentations, for stuff we're doing internally, or I do stuff now with a lot of like nonprofits, whether it's trade groups or universities and students, things like that. And so sometimes I can repurpose those for posts as well. And then sometimes a post that I write about can turn into a slide in my presentations and whatnot also. But then other than that, I spend a lot of time with with our investors, potential investors, some time with media, my colleagues, traveling around to different events, whether it's a trade group event, or it's a investor luncheon, or nonprofits, all types of stuff that will pull me away sometimes as well.
Yeah. What I like to ask, but as we start to wrap up here, is comes from an observation I've had about you, and that is something that really sticks with me about some of the conversations we've had so far, is that your approach to posting, and I think really like your approach to learning, is that you have a very avid learning mindset. You're always seeking, always learning, always reading, always digesting, and then sort of asking questions and presenting research and trying to sort of connect the dots. And I'm curious if that's always been your sort of modus operandi, or if it's a muscle you've trained. Does it come from those early years at RealPage? Because I'm certain that there are those listening or watching that are like, man, I need to kind of get some of that and add that into my daily routine. How did that come together for you?
Yeah, well, I think part out of necessity and part out of observation. And I'll start with the latter. It's I recently got a call from a CEO of a major apartment operator, and he was asking me about a job candidate, and we started talking about other stuff. And I was really struck, like, this guy is incredibly successful, far more successful than me. and he's asking me a lot of questions. And I know he has opinions on things, right? But he wants to know my perspective. And it was very humbling to me, but also like I gathered from that. It's like I started thinking about, so, you know what, like some of the most successful people I know are people who never stop asking questions. And all of us start our careers probably asking a lot of questions to learn. But I think the best ones never stop, even when you're at the top, right? And so
Yeah.
I observed that and I wanted to keep that. And the second thing for me is, out of necessity, is like, you know, as I told you, I stumbled into this industry, right? I didn't have a, you know, kind of I didn't come into it knowing what to do, right? I had to learn a lot, and I knew I needed to learn a lot. And so I wanted to turn that, kind of a starting disadvantage into an advantage, where, I wanted to be somebody who just wasn't just talking to people in my circle of influence all the time, people I worked with, but, kind of using my relationships to exchange, to pick the brains of a lot of people from a lot of different angles, different stakeholders, across the industry and outside of it as well. And so I think it's very important just to be, we all joke about, like, the older we get, the more we realize we don't know, but it's true. And I think we have to be
True.
humble enough to
Yeah.
know that there's a lot we don't know. We can always learn more.
As we look ahead to call it real estate over the next few years, I know there's a lot of like shakeups happening across the industry. It's not the best of time. Maybe it's not the worst of time, but it's not the best of time, right? And so I wanted to know if you have any advice for those out there that are maybe seeking their next opportunity or thinking about their next opportunity, or maybe even unfortunately having been recently laid off. Any advice or encouragement that you can give them from your own experiences so far, having essentially lived through that during the Great Financial?
Yeah, no, I think the best advice I can give is from my experiences that beggars can't be choosers. I think it's very easy for us to have, kind of in our minds, like this long checklist of things that have to happen. And then sometimes like that checklist gets so long that you sort of really, you limit your options. And I think in some ways, like, you're not allowing for the potential to be surprised in a good way, like I was, right? And so be open-minded, don't be too picky, and again, ask those questions. And yeah, obviously circumstances could depend on the individual, but, again, just don't be too picky.
I love that. Jay, thank you so much for your time today. I always like to wrap up with a rapid fire question or two, and the most
Yeah.
obvious one for someone with your background and journalistic talent is asking you what you're reading. So is there a particular book or even a publication that you would recommend to the viewers?
Sure. Yeah. What always surprises me, I don't actually read a lot of books, especially those related to business. There are some things I like more related to other topics, but the stuff I really enjoy reading the most that's relevant. I like to read I like to read some really good thinkers in our industry and the economy overall. I like Bill McBride, the calculated risk guy, who's active on Twitter. John Burns and his team includes people like Chris Porter and demographics, Rick Palacios. They have been some really great thinkers on housing topics. And then also, probably my favorite account on social media I read every day is the CRE analyst account, and just some really, really good stuff that comes out. So again, that's for me where I learn the most, and where I think we get kind of the most bang for your buck in terms of reading time are some of these people who are real experts in these specific topics.
Well, Jay, thank you so much. We'll get those added into the show notes so listeners can follow up and check out some of those accounts. The only thing left to do is to roll out the digital red carpet for you. So tell our listeners what you're up to, where they can find you online, and follow up if they have a question.
Sure. Well, you can find me online everywhere, probably LinkedIn. Search for my name. I'm on Twitter/X as well. And then also in the process of launching eventually a newsletter and podcast here in the next, hopefully, few weeks or months. And you could get the newsletter signups already online at jparsons.com. And been asked over time to, LinkedIn's been great, but sometimes hard to find past content and whatnot. So I'm going to put together a weekly newsletter with some, recaps and other things, and I think some unique content hopefully as well. So whatever your preferred method, hopefully one of those will be useful for you.
Love it. Love it. Well, Jay, congratulations on all your success so far, and good luck with this next chapter with Madera. And again, thank you so much for sharing your insights on transforming cities.
Thanks for having me, Chris.